Good afternoon, and you're very welcome to our continuing coverage of the presidential election count. And the story of the day is that independent candidate Catherine Connolly is on course for a stunning landslide win and will be our 10th president. The result has been a humiliation for the two main government parties, and questions will be asked about strategy in both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And there has been an unprecedented level of spoilt votes, reflecting anger among voters about the process of selecting candidates.
Well, as the counts conclude in each constituency, the results are sent here to Dublin Castle, where they're verified and then published. And when all 43 constituencies have reported, the presidential returning officer will announce the first and what looks like the only count result. And that will be done from St Patrick's Hall in the State Apartments. We'll be bringing you that live, and we'll get reaction from across the political spectrum.
And throughout the afternoon, I'll be here in the RTE newsroom, where our teams are monitoring results as they come in. We'll also be looking at that huge and historic number of spoiled votes which have been cast right around the country. And we'll be at our interactive wall through the afternoon, bringing you results from the various constituencies as they come in. We'll also be asking, can Catherine Connolly make history today by returning the highest number of first preference votes in a presidential election in the history of the state? To do so, she will need to beat Eamon de Valera. He holds that record from 1959, returning 56.3% of first preference votes. Over the next few hours, we'll find out if the next President of Ireland can beat that record or not.
Well, the official results and counts are coming in from constituencies. They started coming in within the last half an hour. The first to report was Cork South Central, the constituency of the Taoiseach, of course. There you can see turnout 46%. Just under 5,000 of those votes were invalid, people either making a mistake or deliberately spoiling their votes. And you can see Catherine Connolly well in the lead with almost 65% of the vote. Heather Humphreys on 28%. And the Fianna Fáil candidate Jim Gavin, who of course withdrew from the campaign, still getting 7% of the vote in the Taoiseach's constituency. Moving on to Dublin South West, turnout 46%, 7,500 invalid votes. Again, Catherine Connolly 63%. Heather Humphreys on just under 28%. Jim Gavin just over 9%. If we move along to Dún Laoghaire, of course, a very solidly Fine Gael constituency. Turnout 47.5%, 3,500 invalid votes. But again, Catherine Connolly winning just under 52% of the vote. Heather Humphreys doing better here than in other constituencies with 40%. Jim Gavin on 8%. And then in Dublin West, turnout of 43%, 4,500 invalid votes. Again, Catherine Connolly 64%, Heather Humphreys nearly 27%, Jim Gavin just over 9%. And in Louth, we have turnout of 47%, just under 8,000 invalid votes. Catherine Connolly nearly 69%, Heather Humphreys 26%, Jim Gavin just over 5%. And in Cork East, turnout of 43%, 4,500 invalid votes. Catherine Connolly 65%, Heather Humphreys 28%, Jim Gavin 6.5%. And in Offaly, turnout of just under 45%, 4,800 invalid votes. The story's the same. Catherine Connolly 62.6%, Heather Humphreys 29%, Jim Gavin 8.5%. And then we can see the national summary. Now, this is with votes from 7 of the 43 constituencies. Turnout 45.5%, 37,000 invalid votes thus far. But the main finding from it, of course, is Catherine Connolly on just under 63% of the vote. Heather Humphreys on just under 30% of the vote. And Jim Gavin, despite withdrawing from the campaign, still on 7.5%. And if you'd like to keep up to date with results for all the constituencies in the presidential election, you can do so by pointing your smartphone or tablet camera at this code on screen now. It'll provide a link that will bring you directly to RTE's full results breakdowns with an interactive map and detailed information across all the 43 constituencies, as well as the overall national summary and the latest updates on the count. You can also log on directly to rte.ie/election. Now, in the past hour, Fine Gael candidate Heather Humphreys has congratulated Catherine Connolly on becoming the next president. She was speaking to reporters, including our own Mark O'Driscoll, at the Count Centre in Ballyhaise in County Cavan.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank all of the people who have voted for me, especially, of course, the people in Cavan and Monaghan who really have turned out in huge numbers to support me. I want to congratulate Catherine on becoming the next President of Ireland. Can I just say that Catherine will be a President for all of us, and she will be my President, and I really would like to wish her all the very, very best.
Could we reflect on the campaign, what went right and what went wrong?
Well, the campaign was busy and I enjoyed it. I really did. And I went to every part of this country, to every county, and I got a wonderful welcome from many, many people, and I enjoyed it. And what it did teach me was this is a wonderful country and we should be very proud of it. I'm glad that I took the opportunity in August to go forward. And this is democracy. And as I said, I really want to wish Catherine all the very, very best.
Do you have any regrets?
No, I have no regrets. I stepped up to the plate, and that's what democracy is about. It's about people putting their name on the ballot paper, about people going forward. So I have absolutely not one regret, and I'm glad I did it.
Is it a bruising campaign? Were you subjected to unfair abuse or scrutiny at any stage?
Yeah, well, I have always tried to honestly answer all the questions that were asked of me. I would say that I found the piece about sectarianism very difficult. My family and I, but especially my family, were subject to some absolutely awful sectarian abuse, and I was disappointed because as a country I thought we had moved on from that, and I do think there needs to be a greater understanding of other traditions in this country, and perhaps that's something that maybe I can contribute towards, because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there, and if we're ever to have a united Ireland, we have to respect all traditions. That is something that I think should be looked at.
Heather, do you have any comment on the spoiled votes?
Look, it's unfortunate that people spoiled their votes, but obviously they feel upset that there wasn't more candidates on the ballot paper. There was, at the end of the day, there was only two candidates, which was Catherine and I, and I'm sure I certainly didn't. I'm sure Catherine expected to have more candidates on the ballot paper as well. So maybe that is something that should be looked at down the road, but that will be a matter for the government.
Heather, what's next for you?
Well, what's next for me? Well, I can tell you I intend to go back and enjoy some quality time with family. I have a 7-week-old grandson that I really haven't seen much of, and I'm very fond of my garden, and I can assure you I have a lot of work to do because I haven't been there for well over 2 months.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's Heather Humphreys, the Fine Gael candidate, congratulating Catherine Connolly on her victory. And if she goes back to the retirement that was so rudely interrupted when she was called back to the service of the party after Mairead McGuinness had to drop out of the campaign due to ill health. But as you can see from the numbers at the bottom of your screen, those are the votes declared so far, 7 constituencies of the 43. She is a distant second in a 2-horse race, and obviously there will be questions, I'm sure, within Fine Gael about the party's strategy and about the campaign that it ran. Try to get the words out there. Now I'm joined in the studio to discuss the results by Pearse Doherty of Sinn Féin, Holly Cairns, leader of the Social Democrats, and Fianna Fáil's James Lawless, Minister for Higher Education. Holly Cairns, if I could go to you first. The Social Democrats were the first party to publicly back Catherine Connolly back in July. At that stage, I don't think anyone would have predicted this result.
I wouldn't say not anybody, because of course the Social Democrats from the beginning...
Well, not the scale of the result.
Yeah, I could see the potential in Catherine. She's somebody, I have to say, that I've always admired since getting elected. I was aware of her before and admired her work, but getting to know her in the last all her work on mother and baby homes, on disability issues, she stood out to me as somebody quite special. And I think the other TDs here will be able to attest to this. You know, she's very softly spoken, but when she stands up to speak, people listen. So I think she has a presence about her. And, you know, this campaign has been incredible. It's a credit to her. It's a credit to her campaign team, to all of the people around the country who joined the movement and got involved. And, you know, this is a landslide win for Catherine. It's a historic day. And, you know, it's extraordinary, I think, the campaign that happened. And, you know, it's kind of, for me, it has a lot of feels of repeal. You know, there's the female-led element. People like Bevan and Kayla and Claire and all of her campaign team have been incredible. There's been written off from the start. Everybody underestimating her the whole way along. And then the extraordinary win today. And I think it shows the appetite for something different. And Catherine's campaign has done something really special in that it gives people hope that that change is possible. So what a day, what a win for her. It's hard to find the words, I think, to capture how special this moment is.
Pearse Doherty, Sinn Féin wasn't quite as quick to back Catherine Connolly. You took your time making your mind up. I think you were mentioned at one stage as a potential candidate for Sinn Féin. Thinking about what could have been?
No, not at all. It just shows that our decision was vindicated. I think, if you look back, and it's probably a lot's happened over the last number of weeks since we came out and endorsed Catherine Connolly. Catherine was fourth in the polls at that time. She went quickly into first position.
Are you taking credit for that?
No, her campaign, if you let me finish, built momentum over and over again. It's working with the combined opposition, with Holly, with those in Labour, people before profit. But the thousands of ordinary people who are out there who were just that natural part of the campaign. I spoke in RTE at the very start of the campaign in one of the debates, and I've said I've not seen anything like this in any election before or any campaign before. This was a very much a grassroots led. We were very happy to be part of it, to be fully engaged with it. The fact that we actually engaged with our party to such a length about what position we would adopt in the election stood for us, because you could see then that activists who were involved with Sinn Féin were out in their droves working alongside activists from other parties in the combined opposition and those who never were involved in politics. And this was very much, as Catherine herself called it, a movement. They broke records in terms of people out on the ground. They broke records in terms of fundraising. They broke records in terms of just that avalanche of support that kept on building and building. And what a stunning victory. This is we talk about landslides. This is just an amazing landslide. And you know something? Catherine Connolly deserves every single bit of it, because she is an amazing candidate. It was a pleasure to work alongside her, and I am going to be so proud to call her president. And I think people really responded to that positive vision, that vision of a fair Ireland, that vision of a neutral Ireland, that vision of a united Ireland. And I think that she's going to provide the leadership that this country needs over the next number of years. But there's also now a responsibility on the rest of us to make sure that that movement continues, because it's also a rejection of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in a very, very big way. And there's a lot of hope out there. There's a lot of hope out there, and they want that to continue and transcend beyond this election.
Okay, hold that thought, because I want to come back to it. James Lawless, I don't really know where to begin with Fianna Fáil's campaign. You're in a rather strange position that your candidate withdrew from the race, so you're kind of like a bystander today, are you?
I suppose you could say we're somewhat neutral. We weren't an active participant in the campaign, certainly for the last couple of weeks. Jim Gavin didn't work out. That's been well documented. We will have our internal review into that. It's obviously disappointing that we didn't have a strong candidate at the finish line. But I think today is Catherine's day, and I want to have no quibbles about that. I want to wish her well in her presidency. We will work with her as we've worked with all presidents. The Taoiseach will have his Article 28 engagements, as he did with Michael D. Higgins and other presidents. And actually, I absolutely salute Catherine and the team around her. But it's not unusual to have a presidency that's not aligned with the executive. We go back to 1990, to Mary Robinson's election. We go back to Michael D. Higgins for the last 14 years, and actually want to salute him as he exits office as well for the outstanding role that he played in Irish life for the last 14 years. So it's actually not at all unusual, and I think the Irish electorate are very sophisticated. I think they differentiate between general elections, local elections, presidential elections. I think this is an election about personalities, about character. Catherine's character came through. I think she had many positive attributes. I said that during the campaign, actually. She was Leaf Oscuelga. She had a strong personal story. She had sincerity and authenticity in spades, which I think really came through. And now she's going to be the president for all of us. So I look forward to working with her in that role.
OK, we'll continue that discussion in a moment, but I think we have a result in from Cork North Central. Yeah. So turnout just under 43%, just over 6,000 invalid votes. And again, a whopping vote for Catherine Connolly, just under 68%. Heather Humphreys on just under 26%, and Jim Gavin 6.4%. So that's 8 of the 43 constituencies. We might get a result sometime this evening. Holly Cairns, how do you build on this politically? Because there was a lot of talk about a united left, which some observers would say is easier when you have a single candidate. It's a little bit more tricky when you're talking about trying to present a united platform in all 43 constituencies in the general election, for instance?
Yeah, I think, how do we build on this? I would say to the people who got involved in Catherine's campaign, who maybe hadn't been involved in politics before, people who maybe thought that politics wasn't for them, that was for some kind of other, I have to say I really relate to that, and that's how I felt during the marriage equality campaign and the repeal referendum. And for me, the repeal referendum was actually a kind of a light bulb moment of realising this is how you affect change. Knocking on doors, asking for votes, getting involved in a campaign, that's how we affect change. So I would say to people who got involved in Catherine's campaign, who were inspired by her because she's reached much further than any one party involved in this campaign, I would say get involved, keep the movement going. Change doesn't stop here. This is how, she represented a vision for Ireland that a lot of people related to, one that was fairer, with more equality. She had a real vision that a lot of people connected with. And I would say to people, that doesn't have to just be a vision or a kind of a pipe dream. That kind of an Ireland can be a reality. And the only way it will happen is by people like you watching who might have gotten involved to stay involved and make change happen. At one of Catherine's events, there was a Vicar Street event for her. And one of the artists said during that event, and this is like a room full of young people, motivated, inspired. It was incredible. It was really, really amazing to be there. And one of the artists said, if you're looking for change and for hope of change, look beside you, like look to your right, look to your left, all of you, that's where it is. And, we've seen that historically, young people not necessarily turning out to vote as much and all of that stuff. I hope that will change to a certain extent as a result of this election. I think that's how we build. OK,
Pearse Doherty, I suppose the strategic imperative for Sinn Féin is less about the presidency per se, it's about presenting a viable alternative government. Would that be fair to say? And do you hope to build on that?
Well, I think, David, when we were chatting before in the later part of the summer, we said we had two objectives here, and that was to make sure that we had somebody in who had a positive value and values in relation to, left politics, fairness and equality, Ireland's position in the world, and a united Ireland in the presidency, and to make sure Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil didn't occupy that space. And the second priority was to make sure we replace this government, because so many people out there, and we heard that on the doorsteps, people who felt completely abandoned in the latest budget, people who felt alienated as a result of the housing crisis, the health crisis. So people want hope, and the best way to effect change is to replace the government. So they're the two objectives. Today we see that Catherine Connolly has been successful. Successful is an understatement in relation to what is just transpired. But as I was saying to you, there are so many people that said to us on the doors, this isn't the end of it. They want it to continue. And, what we've seen over the last while, and this isn't to exaggerate just what's happened, but obviously the opposition, the combined opposition, have been cooperating more than ever before. Than in any time I've been in politics in the Dáil and the Shannon for 18 years. I've never seen the likes of it. This, in terms of this type of election, is a different step towards that. And obviously, Catherine Connolly is an independent. But what happened in this campaign is she shares values that all of us in the combined opposition share. That's why we all got enthusiastically behind her. And I think that people see that out there, that despite maybe the differences between ourselves and other parties on the left or in the opposition, people understand that there's a real hope here, that it doesn't have to be Fianna Fáil Fine Gael the way it has been for the last 100 years. So I think there's a real job for us to do to actually harness that hope, to harness that energy, as Holly says, to encourage people who were involved in that campaign, and there was a lot of them, that never was involved in a political campaign before. That was one of the things that struck me being out on the ground with Catherine in different areas, the amount of people who said to her, I wrote to you months ago asking you to stand for the presidency. These are people who are not involved in political parties, but to get involved, to join in whatever way, to be part of it, because the next step has to be, in my view, is about replacing the government.
OK. James, because of the way the campaign developed, it became a government candidate against an anti-government candidate, and the people have given their judgment, haven't they?
Yeah, well, they don't actually accept that. It was a Fine Gael candidate versus an independent candidate. The independent candidate had support of perhaps 45% of the electorate, the political parties. The Fine Gael candidate started with maybe 20% and didn't really break above that. If you look at the Ireland Thinks polling that came in overnight, the exit poll, 1 in every 2 people that voted for Catherine Connolly said they wouldn't vote for the United Left alternative. So I suppose I don't want to rain on anyone's parade today, and it is very much Catherine's victory, and I salute that and wish her well. But I wouldn't read into it. The next general election is 4 years away. We have a lot of work to do in government. We want to get on with the job of government. We did just have a general election less than 12 months ago We had local elections about 12 months ago, and European election. My own party, Fianna Fáil, came first in all of those elections and the Seanad contest as well. The most senators, the most councillors, the most TDs, and I think joined first in terms of MPs. So we've had very successful elections very recently. But ultimately, we want to get on with the job of government. There is a lot of work to do. I don't disagree with Pierce at all. There's a lot of issues we need to tackle. We want to tackle those. And in terms of the united opposition, again, I'm going to congratulate them on the result today, but I don't know how long that will last. I mean, will there be a united candidate for the by-election in Galway, for example? Are they going to be putting up one candidate between them, or will there be multiple candidates? I don't know what that's going to be, but I think it'll be interesting to watch as it plays out over the next number of months.
OK, in a word, will there be a united left candidate in the by-election, Holly Cairns, do you think?
We haven't even gotten through this election yet, but we've always encouraged people to vote left, transfer left, and we would absolutely continue to encourage people to do that.
And that's the key thing. It's about encouraging people to vote left, and whatever candidate wins a particular constituency, it's important that it can be a coalition that is different from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. But it is interesting to hear Fianna Fáil just say that they weren't involved in the campaign, like airbrush the first few weeks out of it. Right. The reality is Fianna Fáil were involved in the campaign at the start, and your campaign was faltering. There was a very clear view that Catherine Connolly was the people's choice from the very, very start in relation to this year. I know Jim Gavin pulled out later on, but all the polls showed that he was in a very distant
She was in
place.
fourth place, towards the end of the summer. Jim Gavin, I think, in an early poll. Actually, Jim Gavin, I think, was on 12%. Billy Keller was on maybe another 11% or something. So the combined Fianna Fáil vote at that stage was actually the highest. But look, polls are polls. 140 polls had Fianna Fáil coming third in the last 5 years. Fianna Fáil won the general election. So, we'll take them with a degree of salt as well.
Quick word from Holly Cairns.
On the general election, because I do take your point in relation to that, but I will say, and I think a lot of people on the ground during election would say, that there was a huge element of kind of disillusionment and also kind of acceptance that, like, nothing's going to change. And what I would say to people watching today is I hope that this election has shown that that isn't necessarily the case, that there is potentially an alternative.
Sorry to cut across, but I do need to bring in another result, which I think is from Meath West. Yes, indeed, 44% turnout, 4,500 invalid votes. Same story again. Catherine Connolly, 64%. Heather Humphreys, 29%. Jim Gavin, 7%. So that is 9 of the 43 constituencies in. And we can see Catherine Connolly at the moment on 63.4%. Heather Humphreys just over 29%. Jim Gavin on 7%. And nearly 50,000 spoiled votes thus far. But for now, let's go over to Miriam.
Thanks, Dave. I'm here in Dublin Castle joined by Gareth Sheridan, a would-be presidential candidate. How are you feeling today, Gareth?
I feel fine. I mean, look, I think today is Catherine Connolly's day. We should, congratulate her on a well-fought campaign, and indeed Heather. She really put it up to her as well, and I think that's the story of today. It's Catherine's day, really, and that's where the focus should be. We have a new president, incoming now, and again, that's all we can really say on that point. I think in terms of the election itself, the scrutiny of the candidates is probably over. I don't think the scrutiny of the election and how it was handled will be over. I think that will continue. But again, we don't want to take away from Catherine Connolly and let her enjoy the day that's in it.
Were you disappointed when you talk about the scrutiny of how it was run that you didn't get on to actually be a competitor in the election?
Yeah, I think it's not really about me at this point. I think the electorate deserved a more diverse, wider ballot to choose from, and I think that's a big takeaway from this election, is that a two-horse race was somewhat underwhelming, and I think it's obvious in the numbers that came out to vote. It's obvious in the spoiled vote count, for example, and these are things that just need to be looked at. I think going forward, it's important to remember that the position of president is of the people, right? It's not of the parties, and the people should have a wider choice of potential candidates, and we want to make sure that we take learnings from this time around and make sure that next time around maybe the nomination process is different, for example. I think maybe we look at changes to the nomination process for the council route, and instead you could have a position where you have 80 councillors not necessarily tied to one specific authority. Things like that would make sure that interference in a way wouldn't be seen again. But again, these are things that'll come, I'm sure, over the next months and years before the next election.
Another thing a number of people have been saying to me around here today in the Castle is that very few people going forward might put themselves up for the presidential election because it is so brutal, it is so bruising. Even in the short time you were trying to get on a ticket, did you find that difficult?
Yeah, I was prepared for it. I was warned very heavily that the scrutiny that comes with it is intense. Now, I was prepared for the scrutiny. What I found quite eye-opening was the abuse. And there's a very there's a very, very big difference between scrutiny and abuse. Good journalism, good background checks, looking into the person is all welcome. But the abuse that you see from anonymous social media accounts online, targeting people around you, targeting young people, it's something that I think needs to be looked at now. And again, lessons can be taken from that, particularly when we're looking at our younger population that will feel that influence. I personally think a social media account should be tied to a government ID, and that would be a good start. But again, we need to really differentiate and be careful that we don't put scrutiny and abuse in the same box.
2 final questions. Would you run for politics here? Is that your plan?
Right now, I'm very focused on the issues I was trying to raise. So whatever means I use to highlight those and continue to work on it, I'll take a couple of months to figure that out. But I'm not going away in terms of tackling those issues. They're close to my heart, and if I can have an impact, I'll certainly do that. So we'll see.
I'm taking that it's a maybe, that you would.
We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Maybe is a good way of putting it. But we're home now, not going anywhere, and the issues at hand are issues close to my heart. And if I can have an impact, I'll take it on.
OK, well, Gareth Sheridan, thanks very much for chatting to us today in Dublin Castle. And for now, back to Fran.
Thank you, Miriam. Well, we're joined here in the newsroom by Barry Lenihan from Radio 1. Hello, Barry. 9 first counts in, but we want to look at 2 constituencies in particular, tallies for them. First, Dublin Midwest, and look at where Catherine Connolly is. Look at the spoil votes and look where Jim Gavin is.
That's it. Catherine Connolly on 56%, as we see here. In other Dublin constituencies, she's in the mid-70s. But the spoiled votes particularly significant in this constituency because this is the area where we have seen the events in City West and Saggart during the week. In an alternative electoral universe, what might Fianna Fáil's Jim Gavin have garnered? This is his home constituency, Round Towers, Clondalkin, his home GAA club. And also look at Heather Humphreys for Gael, running second to the spoiled votes. Frances Fitzgerald, the former Taoiseach, she'd been mentioned as an alternative candidate. She's from here.
Let's look at another constituency and the tally for that. Sligo-Leitrim, leaving Connolly on similar numbers, but when you look at Heather Humphreys, it's a different story.
And remember, in the general election a few short months ago, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the 2 government parties, garnered 41.7% of the vote across 4 candidates. And here we see what Heather Humphreys and Jim Gavin are on today, as well as the trend of spoiled votes. But in terms of Catherine Connolly, it is an emphatic success. It is worth noting that her brother-in-law, Declan Bree, the former Labour Party TD, now independent councillor, he's been canvassing quite intensely for Catherine Connolly in this constituency, including in Collooney the other night, I am told. So maybe he is behind that vote. But again, a different constituency, but the same result.
And he, a well-known vote getter. And interesting to note the spoiled votes on 11% in Sligo-Leitrim. Let's just talk for a moment about spoiled votes and the history of it. We were saying earlier, Barry, you have to go all the way back to 1945 to get the record for the number of spoiled ballots in a presidential election. In the last presidential election, it was on just over 1%. It looks now like a new record is about to be set.
And even in the general election of last year, it was just 0.7%. And we are seeing across the 43 constituencies spoiled votes somewhere mainly in the teens, mid-teens to high teens. But also look at the demographics. We looked at Dublin Midwest. We look at more working class areas in Dublin, in Jobestown and Tala. 2 boxes there returned 53% spoiled votes in one, 49% in the other. And that trend continuing across the country. In Offaly, for instance, we have a first count in there which shows officially the spoiled ballots at 17%. So high numbers wherever you go.
Yeah, and all of them giving different messages, maybe wanting one candidate, not being happy with the choice, no single reason for somebody spoiling the ballot, which I think is important to note. Let's look at turnout and the situation we have. 2018, that presidential election was a record low. We're hovering around that now in many constituencies. Are we likely to see another record on that?
It looks like it, judging by the constituencies that are counting at the moment. In the RDS and the Dublin constituencies, many of those that had a turnout figure, it was in the mid to high 30s. So we are perhaps looking at a record low. And factor in what we've just discussed in terms of spoiled votes, in terms of the number of voters as well who went for the effective riderless horse in Fianna Fáil's Jim Gavin. You have a fifth maybe of the electorate who did voting for spoiling or for Mr Gavin, added to a low turnout. So there's likely to be lots of questions in the days ahead in the political sphere.
And in the hours ahead too, Barry, we'll get answers to those questions as well.
Hopefully.
Thanks for joining us. That's it from the newsroom for now. Stay tuned. We'll take a short break.
welcome back to our continuing coverage of the results of the presidential election. Well, as you all probably know by now, Catherine Connolly is in a landslide victory going to be the new President of Ireland. That is absolutely definitive at this stage. Well, for more on this, I'm now joined here in Dublin Castle by the Taoiseach Simon Harris. Thank you very much for joining us, Taoiseach.
Thank you, Miriam.
A great day for Catherine Connolly, a bad day for your party and Heather Humphreys.
Well, firstly, can I congratulate sincerely Catherine Connolly. The election campaign is over. Catherine Connolly has clearly won. She is going to be the President of Ireland. She's going to be my President, the President for everybody in this country. And we all wish her well, sincerely. Her success will be our country's success. And a huge cohortigas to her, to all her supporters, on a very well-run campaign and a very decisive and clear result today. Look, I want to thank Heather Humphreys. She's been a great candidate. She's a great friend, a great colleague. She stepped into the breach nearly at the last minute when Mairead had to withdraw on health grounds. She gave it her all. Hundreds of thousands of people came out across the country and voted for her. Yesterday she carried herself with great dignity, travelled right around the country. I'm very proud of her. We always knew this election was going to be a challenge. Really, once it became a contest between two candidates, that was always going to be a particular challenge. I think it was a defining moment when the Fianna Fáil candidate wasn't able to continue any longer.
Did you choose the right candidate? I mean,
absolutely.
Should it have been Sean Kelly?
Sean Kelly's a superb individual. Huge respect and time for Sean Kelly. But I'm absolutely convinced we picked the right candidate. Heather Humphreys was an excellent candidate. We had an open process, 2 weeks for people to put their name forward. Sean took part in that process, and Heather was resoundingly chosen as a result of that.
Some people were saying you've been missing in action, that you haven't been seen around Heather Humphreys that much towards the end of the campaign. Did you sense there was going to be a defeat here?
Well, not at all. I was out canvassing with Heather in Sligo and Donegal only, I think, 2 days before polling. I've been out lots of times with her, but you're always conscious when you're the leader of a party as well, making sure your candidate shines, and God did Heather shine right across the country. We've also had budgets and a week in the UN and a very busy period of time, but we've been fully behind Heather. I think we've run a very good campaign as a party.
Was it too negative, Taoiseach? People are saying maybe your campaign was too negative and it was more of an attack on Catherine Connolly rather than a positive promotion of Heather.
Yeah, I wouldn't accept that. I mean, and I don't want to relitigate the election because Catherine is going to be our president, and I really respect that and wish her well. I think in a campaign, though, it's okay to ask robust questions back and forward. And I do smile a little bit when people talk about negative ads. You should see the amounts that are produced about me and my party on a very regular basis by other political parties. It's okay to ask questions of your opponents during an election. The election is now over. The result is clear. Catherine Connolly will be our next president, and we wish her very well.
It's also being viewed as very much an establishment government candidate defeated at the hand of a new voice, a new Ireland, a left voice, and therefore it's a vote against your government, really.
I think presidential elections are always a little bit different. I remember in 2011, Enda Kenny was our Taoiseach. Fine Gael had gotten 36% of the vote, and later that year Fine Gael ran in a presidential election and got 6%, and Michael D. Higgins was elected. There wasn't a correlation between Michael D. Higgins' elections and the fortunes of the Labour Party, nor the fortunes of Fine Gael and Gay Mitchell's performance. So I think people do differentiate in relation to a presidential election, and I think that's okay too.
There is, though, a large mass of disaffected people, clearly. I mean, it's a very low turnout. There's a lot of spoiled votes. How do you explain that?
That's what I'm most particularly concerned about. That's what I most take from this election, quite frankly. There's a clear winner of the election, of that there's no doubt. But I am most concerned about the number of people in Ireland now who are clearly feeling disaffected or disconnected with politics.
But you're the government.
Yeah, we are the government, but I don't think it's just for the government. They didn't come out and vote for the opposition either. They didn't come out and vote. It looks like potentially, you could see so many, well, you're going to say, what was the turnout, maybe 40%, so maybe 60% of the electorate in and around choosing not to vote, 10% or more choosing to spoil their ballot. People going to quite a lot of effort in spoiling their ballot. I want to acknowledge that. People putting a bit of thought into what they wanted to put on the paper. And I want to say, as a relatively new political leader, I want to listen to those people. I want to really try and get under the bonnet of the issues that are making people feel more disconnected with politics, both government and opposition. And I think we have to be humble today in relation to that.
Do we also need to think about trying to get more people on the ballot? I mean, I was just interviewing Gareth Sheridan there. He didn't get on it. We know Maria Steen didn't get on it. Do we need maybe to change the way in which we get people on the candidate so they can become a candidate in the presidential election?
I have an open mind about that, and I'm happy to engage constructively across party lines on that. It'll obviously be 7 years now till the next presidential election. There has to be some threshold, but is the threshold correct? Does the threshold need to change? I think that's a fair conversation to have. Having said that, even within the confines of the current threshold, I don't think anybody expected there to only be 2 active candidates seeking the presidency. I certainly didn't. I would have been expecting a field of around 4 or 5. But then a number of parties in the Dáil, as is their right, coalesced around one candidate in Catherine Connolly. Obviously, we know what happened in relation to Fianna Fáil. So that did narrow the field as well.
Do you also think this is a statement? In the past, people have always wanted, the left parties wanted to come together as a group. They've done it very successfully today. Is that something you're concerned about going forward as Fine Gael?
So I don't intend to take from their day. They deserve today. They've won the presidential election. I wish them well with their victory, and I wish President-elect Connolly well too. I do think when you get to a general election, it's very different. Firstly, it's 4 years away. Are you going to have? Are the Labour Party going to be asking people to vote for Mary Lou McDonald to be Taoiseach? Can they agree on a policy agenda? And the turnout is very different in a general election. So I think it's quite a leap to go from here to extrapolating what that might mean in the future.
Finally, why do you think so many people voted for Catherine Connolly over your candidate, Heather Humphreys? Why do you think that was?
So I'd invert that. Heather Humphreys held the Fine Gael vote and got more than the Fine Gael vote. So we don't have final figures, but it looks like she'll get close to 30% of the vote. That's way more than Fine Gael is polling and way more than Fine Gael got in a general election. So Heather attracted the Fine Gael vote plus some more vote. But lots of other people who didn't wish to vote Fine Gael coalesced around Catherine Connolly, and they made it very clear that they wanted her to be our next president. She will be our next president. And then, as you say, many people sat at home and sat out this election, and we've really got to do some soul searching in relation to that too.
Do you have any regrets about how the campaign was run and the candidate you chose?
I have no regrets in relation to the candidate we chose. Heather Humphreys was a superb candidate, and I think of Mairead McGuinness as well today, and I sent her our best wishes too. Fine Gael had 2 processes and managed to select 2 candidates, 2 fine parliamentarians, 2 great candidates. And of course, in any election campaign, we look back, we learn. We're a party under renewal under my leadership, and we have much work ahead. OK, well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today, Simon Harris. Back to you, David, in studio.
Thanks very much, Miriam. Now, Pierce Doherty, the Taoiseach, putting a brave face on it there. Heather Humphreys got more than the Fine Gael vote, which is, strictly speaking, true.
Well, look, he's the master of spin. And look, I do commiserate with Heather Humphreys. I've lost elections myself, and it's not a good place to be in. I think there'll be I don't need to ask questions of the Taoiseach, because I think there's going to be a lot of questions asked within his own party in terms of their own candidate selection, how they humiliated it, I think, Sean Kelly in the process of not allowing him to run.
Well, he didn't get enough. He didn't get the votes.
Yeah, and look, then who decided that? Who whipped their parliamentary party into it? But I must take issue at Simon Harris in relation to one of the issues that he raised. He talks about he wanted to see more candidates in the field. He was the person who gave a directive to his councillors to block candidates running. In all of the elections before this, it is through the local authority system. Indeed, we've seen it in the local authority system. Motion after motion was coming forward from Fine Gael councillor not to nominate anybody. It was Sinn Féin, Labour, Social Democrats and others who were actually voting against that, but they had the majority with Fianna Fáil, and that's why people didn't get onto the ballot paper. So the idea that he wants to rewrite history now is ridiculous. And that process always worked in the past. We've had 6 candidates, we've had 5 candidates. People were always able to go through that, and the local authorities were able to filter through as to who they believed would be credible enough to be able to stand.
Well, I suppose the government parties would say they have the seats on the council to control that process.
Yeah,
and that's democracy, isn't it?
If you want to do that, you don't get the right to stand on national radio on the day that Catherine Connolly's elected and say, I wish there was more candidates, when you actually were the person that decided that there wasn't, and then actually say that he wants to listen to the people who spoiled their vote. In many, they did it for many reasons, and we do need to hear them, but many of them spoiled their vote because of exactly the fact that Fine Gael ensured, including with the support of Fianna Fáil, that other names couldn't get onto the ballot paper.
OK, Holly Cairns, I mean, we have heard suggestions about reform to the presidential nomination process over the last couple of weeks, and that was a factor in some people spoiling their votes, not everyone, obviously. But do we need to look at that, do you think?
I think we should be open to discussion about that, absolutely. Pierce has highlighted the issue around party councillors being whipped and that preventing a lot of people from accessing the ballot. But I think another thing to probably reflect on in this moment is other candidates trying to get onto the ballot did actually start out very late, and they didn't really have the time then to get around to all of the local authorities or, explore really the other avenues that are available to people. And I think what we saw from Catherine was she was out early and she worked tirelessly for months, and that is the kind of effort you have to put into a presidential campaign. And I don't think we really saw people who were willing to give it that. And I'm glad that we have somebody who will show up to the Oireas in the same way.
OK, and James Lulls has thoughts on that, but I'm going to wait until after an ad break to see what those thoughts might be. Before we go, I think we have another result from Fingal West. Yeah, Dublin Fingal West. Turnout 46.5%, just over 3,000 invalid votes. 68% for Catherine Connolly, 23% for Heather Humphreys, 9% for Jim Gavin. And that means that the national picture now is... not coming up. No, there it is. 10 of 43 constituencies, 45% turnout thus far, just over 51%, 51,000 invalid votes. 63.7% for Catherine Connolly, 28.8% for Heather Humphreys, and the man who wasn't running, Jim Gavin, 7.5%. We'll have more after this break. You're very welcome back to our continuing coverage of the presidential election count. The big news, of course, landslide victory for independent candidate Catherine Connolly. We've been joined on our panel by Martin Hayden, Minister for Agriculture, and Fine Gael, Director of Elections. You won't be highlighting that in your CV, I suspect.
Oh, I'm very proud of the campaign that we ran, very proud of the energy and enthusiasm that everybody in the party and the people outside the party who supported Heather's campaign. First of all, let me start by congratulating Catherine and all of her team on a great success, and I wish her every success as president. She'll have our full support because it's really, really important that goes well for her, and then it goes well for the whole country. But I'm really proud of Heather as well. And in terms of what we did, you talk about spoiled votes, you talk about different elements today. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with the fact that there was only 2 candidates who contested this election throughout. We in Fine Gael put one of them forward. So
you also stopped your councillors supporting other candidates getting on the ballot paper.
So let's be really clear here. If you look at the Oireachtas, you need 20 nominations from the Oireachtas.
I'm talking about the county councils.
Yeah, OK, the county councils are fine. We don't have control of any of the 31 local authorities. It was open to other parties to do it. The reason there wasn't more candidates in the field is because 5 parties in opposition coalesced behind one candidate. Sinn Féin alone have 45 members of the Oireachtas. They had the ability to elect 2 candidates. We in Fine Gael made a decision last March that we were going to contest this election because we wanted to try and have a candidate that was going to try and win it. And if they didn't win it, that it was going to be whoever did so with a mandate that we had made it a proper contest. Obviously, Mairead unfortunately withdrew in August because she got sick. We had a decision. We could have set it out. Absolutely not. We believe in the institutions of the state in Fine Gael. We believed in having that as a proper contest. Heather stood up. We ran the campaign, and we were a reason it was a contest, where other parties decided not to put people forward, either through the local authority or through the Oireachtas.
Okay.
There were 55.
I'm lost in admiration for your reasoning there.
But just let me make the point about the Oireachtas. There are 234 members of the Oireachtas. You just need 20 of them to nominate a candidate. Fine Gael have 55 members of the Oireachtas. So the Oireachtas alone could have elected another 8 candidates without, even going to the local authorities.
Looking back on the campaign, a lot of people were quite surprised that Fine Gael, which is a party that's been in government for 14 years, has been relatively successful over the last century or so, that you ran such a wogus campaign.
So look, I would say many things happened in the build-up to this that were not anticipated. Obviously, our initial candidate getting sick and having to withdraw, we wish Mairead well on her recovery, was one. Jim Gavin's withdrawing from contesting the campaign was seismic. We never anticipated a 2-candidate presidential. We expected there to be 4 or 5 candidates. 3 we thought was tight. And then when Jim pulled back, it was a very, very different election campaign when it's a head-to-head, and you had somebody who had the backing of 5 political opposition parties against our one, albeit with the support of some independents. And our one candidate obviously is from the party that are in government. The candidate that was backed by the 5 parties has been in opposition all of her time in Dáil Éireann. So therefore it became a very binary choice. It was quite easy for the opposition to make it about anti-establishment and beyond. They did that really well. Fair play to them. But we were against 5 parties, 5 press offices, 5 different social media channels that have a huge reach.
That's not necessarily an advantage, though, unless those 5 can unify around a candidate, and they did.
And they did. And I look forward to see if they're going to do that in the by-election in Galway now.
OK, we might come along to that. James Lawless, I rudely cut across you when you were about to deliver words of wisdom about the nomination process.
Look, I think there has to be some kind of a balance here, and I think that we're in a situation where we have more independent councillors and independent TDs and members of the Oireachtas than ever before, and then we have independent candidates saying they couldn't get on the ballot and blaming the parties. I think there's a little bit of a that's not really logical. I think we had to have a balance because if you look at the European elections that we had just last year, we had ballot papers so long they wouldn't fit in the ballot box. People are counting them this size. So it can't be a free-for-all. There should be some mechanisms. Now, the other thing I'd say is that a lot of the candidates enter the race very late. Gareth Sheridan appeared in mid-August. Maria Steen appeared in late August.
Gareth Sheridan was working on the councils for months.
Well, he broke cover, first time I heard of him was in mid-August. When Sean Gallagher was out and about, he was out in March and April meeting councillors. So look, I hear the point, and there's I think one suggestion that's come through, I think, is merit, which is that a certain number of councillors from across a number of different county councils could coalesce to form a nominating block. But I don't think it should be just that anyone can get on the ballot, because we saw where that went. And actually, I would question the use of public monies for candidates in the European elections, putting the litter of Humacon out through the letterboxes. And there was all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff coming out. And really, taxpayers' expense, 25, 26 candidates on some ballot papers. So there should be some checks. Was it too tight? Like Martin, it's incredible to think there's only 2 candidates left at the finish line. I would expect it 4, 5, 6, maybe midsummer. But the independent councillors and TDs have a lot to answer for there as well. They can't turn around to the parties and say, well, you wouldn't back our man or woman, when they wouldn't necessarily back them themselves.
Well, you could have, both of your parties could have decided not to block independent candidates.
Well, we didn't block. I'm actually Secretary of the National Executive. We gave the guidance we gave was very deliberately given to say we asked them to support our candidate. Left everything else to their discretion.
OK, Holly Cairns, I'm sure you'll have to deal with your conscience about ganging up on poor Martin Hayden there with your colleagues. But this did become, to an extent, government versus opposition election. And, there's a clear answer to that. The question is whether that vote would transfer to a general election, because a presidential election, obviously, there's no effect on policy or anything like that. So a general election, would you accept, is a very different kettle of fish.
It is a different kettle of fish. And I have to say that I think Catherine's campaign reached beyond any of the reach of the individual parties that backed her. I think that's really important to acknowledge. I think that she was an exceptional candidate. I think she's always been an exceptional parliamentarian. I think her campaign did extraordinary work. And I think, she spoke about the movement before it was recognised by, loads of people. And I think that movement was a real ground-up movement that we saw. And I suppose, I kind of touched on this earlier, but I hope that those people will stay involved in politics, stay mobilised, become more active, because that is how we make change happen. I don't think that any one political party has that reach at the moment, and that's the truth. I just hope that what this campaign has showed, it's made something that has been there, the option for something different, the possibility of that, it's made that tangible. So I think this can be a turning point.
But will the Social Democrats benefit from that?
Is.
Because the last opinion poll, the Irish Times opinion poll, showed your support down 1 point, while Sinn Féin's support was up 5 points. So there might be an argument that a united left will benefit the biggest component of it.
Our focus is going to be growing the Social Democrats, and we've been going up steadily in the polls, depending on which one you look at, for a long time now. The week before that, we were up. So I think, it is a margin of error. But I think, what we've seen is growth across the board for a more progressive option. In the local elections, we doubled our number of councillors. We've doubled the size of a parliamentary party in the general election. And so our focus and our hope is to build, because throughout the last general election as well, all I heard from people in the last few days was, I wish there was a candidate here, I wish there was a candidate there. And I want to say to those people, I hear you. Our focus now is growth. We want to build, we want to grow, we want to reach more people.
I think when we see Pierce Doherty here earlier, and he's obviously very pleased today. I was on another panel earlier with Matt Carty, and they're delighted, and they're talking about more left coalescing. Why wouldn't they? Mary Lou was up, Sinn Féin were up 5 points in last weekend's poll, where the Social Democrats were down 1. Labour were static. So,
Labour were up 2, actually.
Well,
the Green Party were static. Anyway,
okay. Margin of error. But anyway, the point is, Sinn Féin benefited from that coalescing much more than everyone else, and we know what they did to the SDLP in the north, and I think that's a big challenge as the left looks to continue to coalesce into the future. OK, well, let's catch up on some new results. I think we have a couple in. Dublin, Fingal East, turnout 47%, invalid 3,000. Catherine Connolly 61%, Heather Humphreys just under 29%, Jim Gavin 10%. Moving on to Laois, turnout 44%, 4,000 invalid votes. Catherine Connolly 65%, Heather Humphreys 28%, Jim Gavin 7%. Moving along now to Meath East, Catherine Connolly's just under 63%, Heather Humphreys just under 30%, Jim Gavin 7.5%, and there were 5,000 spoiled votes there. Cork South West, the constituency of Holly Cairns, turnout 48%, very respectable, 3,500 spoiled votes. Catherine Connolly just under 60%, Heather Humphreys 33%, and Jim Gavin 7.5%. That, of course, a constituency with a tradition, a Fine Gael tradition. Tipperary North, 47% turnout, 4,000 invalid votes.
Catherine Connolly 58%, Heather Humphreys 33%, Jim Gavin 9.1%. Not bad for somebody not campaigning. Tipperary South 44%, 3,800 invalid votes. Catherine Connolly 60, just under 62%, Heather Humphreys 31%, Jim Gavin 7%. Moving on to Longford Westmeath, turnout just under 44%, 6,800 invalid votes. Catherine Connolly 59%, Heather Humphreys 34%, Jim Gavin 7%. And moving on to the national summary. Now, that's 18 of 43 constituencies, so we're getting close to the halfway mark. Turnout 45.4%, a bit higher than people had anticipated, higher at this stage anyway than in the last presidential election. Just shy of 90,000 invalid votes out of over 500,000. And as it stands, Catherine Connolly is just under 63% of the vote, Heather Humphreys just under 30% of the vote, and Jim Gavin on 7.5% of the vote. So I have to thank my panel, Martin Hayden, Holly Cairns, James Lawless. Thanks indeed for your analysis and for being with us. I suspect, Holly, you're on your way to a celebration in Dublin Castle, but thanks you for taking the time to talk to us. And let's go over to Miriam.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we're in the castle. It's starting to rain, but I'm joined by Paul Cunningham and Ellen Coyne, political correspondent of the Irish Times. Paul, take us to where we are, the big picture.
Yeah, just on the big picture, we now have 18 of the 43 constituencies declared, so 5 in the past 10 minutes, so we're beginning to see that pace. We always have to remember it's the last constituency which gets us over the line, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. Catherine Connolly on 62%, Heather Humphreys on 29%. Simon Harris saying earlier on, the Fine Gael leader, that around 30% was where he thought it was going to land for his party, and Jim Gavin is on 7%. One interesting thing is just on turnout. We do know that last time it was 43.9%, currently it's 45.5%. So at the moment, we're still ahead of where we were in 2018 than behind.
Ellen Coyne, you covered this extensively. Why do you think Catherine Connolly has triumphed so well today?
I think the public are very judicious about presidential elections. They take them very seriously, and I think the Irish electorate like to put their values in Áras an Uachtaráin and keep their interests in Dáil Éireann. And I think there's so many interesting echoes to 1990 here, where so many people on the centre, those kind of centrist Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael voters, voted for Mary Robinson even though they didn't agree with her on some fundamental issues. And I think given the landslide victory that Catherine Connolly is in line for today, that must have happened to her as well. This couldn't have just been a left vote. She had a very, very broad appeal and a very successful and compelling campaign.
Do you think, Paul, there was maybe a negative aspect to the campaign run by Heather Humphreys' team, and that maybe that didn't work for them in the end?
I think it can only be described as negative at times, and I don't believe that it helped their case. I agree with Ellen that to a certain extent people are looking at hope, the possibility, it's the best of us, and I don't think that Fine Gael captured that message, and we can just see that the trend was there, and yet Fine Gael pursued with its message, and now we have Catherine Connolly in a position where she's exceeding what the last opinion poll was. She's done better than retreated. The strategy did not work.
We can't ignore the fact, Ellen, that, not that many people at the end of the day turned out to vote, even if it is 45%. Do you think it's because that we ended up with 2 people only on the ballot? And should we be in a position maybe going forward where more people, like Garrett Sheridan I spoke to earlier, or Maria Steen, get on the ballot?
Well, I think that was reflected in opinion polls the whole way along, that there was a very significant cohort of the electorate that weren't just undecided, they actively felt like the 2 candidates did not represent them. And I think that's, it's a good thing in a society like Ireland that the whole electorate cannot be represented by a binary choice of 2 candidates. I also think, you could look at the 2 candidates that we have. It would be arguable that people who are on the centre-right of the political spectrum were not really represented in this presidential election at all. And I think that was a big motivating factor for the massive amount of spoiled votes that we've seen in this presidential election. I think that some of the government parties might be arguing that the ballot paper should be longer. People can make up their own mind if that's something that they're arguing in their own interest, because transfers certainly would have helped Heather Humphreys today. But on the face of it, you would have to question who would put themselves forward for a presidential election, given how brutal and bruising this campaign was, not just for the 2 people who got on the ballot, but the people who tried to get on it as well.
And on that point, I remember coming in this morning and I was thinking of somebody like Jim Gavin, because whatever the rights and wrongs are, It is a brutal campaign, isn't it, Paul?
We say it every time. I've been doing a few of these, and yet you still have people volunteering themselves to come forward. Maybe it's because we look at these elections very, very closely. That's exactly what the word is. They are brutal occasions, and yet there is something about the presidency of the first citizen, of the potential of being that leader both domestically and internationally. It's very appealing, and maybe the other thing is it maybe goes on for a little bit too long. At 7 years, I think a shorter term would be better. But that idea of how you could represent a nation is a powerful thing, and I think people continue to put themselves forward to.
Yeah, and I suppose also the idea now that Heather Humphreys was very much the government establishment candidate. Catherine Connolly represented something new and different of the left. Do you think this is almost a judgment today on the government or not, Ella?
I don't really think so, only because I would give the electorate the credit of seeing the presidency as something really distinct in its own right. I think that obviously there will be a lot of jubilation here today from the 5 parties in the Oireachtas that backed Catherine Connolly, but the next general election, fingers crossed, is a long way away, we hope.
Everyone needs to recover.
Yes, and I think, you know, it's very much up in the air if the way that they came together for this presidential election could be replicated in a general election to bring in a left-wing government, the first non-Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael government in the history of the state.
OK, listen, Ellen Coyne, Paul Cunningham, thank you so much. And the rain has stopped, so hey, happy days. We're going to take a break. Join us in a few moments.
You're very welcome back to our continuing coverage of the presidential election count, with constituency results now coming in thick and fast. I think we have a couple of new first counts in. Yep, Cork Northwest. turnout 47%, nearly 4,000 invalid votes. Catherine Connolly 56.5%. Heather Humphreys doing a bit better here than the national picture in a constituency with traditionally a strong Fine Gael vote. She has 34.5%. Jim Gavin on 8.9%. In Kerry, turnout of 44.8%, invalid votes 7,000. Catherine Connolly on 63%, Heather Humphreys just a shade under 30%, and Jim Gavin on 7.4%. And in Wexford, turnout just under 44%, invalid votes 4,500. Catherine Connolly on 66.7%, Heather Humphreys on just under 27%, Jim Gavin 6.5%. And Dublin Midwest, another result in turnout of 42%, 7,300 invalid votes, give or take. Catherine Connolly on a whopping 71%, Heather Humphreys just under 20%, and Jim Gavin on just over 9%. So, joining me to discuss those results, Alison O'Connor, columnist with the Sunday Times, Professor Teresa Reedy of UCC and Professor Gary Murphy of DCU. The turnout figure looks like it might be a bit better than had been expected. It might be at around the same level as last time.
Yeah, that's exactly what struck me looking at those compared to what we were hearing yesterday and even earlier. And it was 44% the last time. It's from what we saw there. Yeah. It's looking like it's.
Yeah, well, we're only halfway.
We're only in fairness, we are only halfway, and I think it's better. I think overall for the country. The notion of it being of the turnout being higher, that more people came out to vote, although you have to put the rider there about the spoiled votes. But I think it's better for the future, even of Catherine Connolly's presidency. I think all the politicians that are speaking today, even those who are not supporting her, have made that point. She will now be our president. It raises an interesting point, though, that we're hearing that Taoiseach Micheál Martin is not going to be apparently at Dublin Castle if and when, as we expect, that she is going to be announced president. That strikes me as an odd, slightly churlish, if I may say. And somebody in Fianna Fáil just mentioned to me that it was sort of vaguely said, well, it's happening earlier maybe than you thought, and mentioned that the Cork Jazz Festival is on. Which brought to mind, it just sounded a little feeble, really.
Okay. Cork people do like the jazz.
Well, I mean, listen, you could talk about all the trouble that Micheál Martin is having in Fianna Fáil for what happened with Jim Gavin and everything. On the home front, there's a lot of ire in terms of people look, because of course Billy Kelleher is another Cork man, and a lot of people I know in Cork City who would not pay a lot of attention to politics, they paid attention to the fact that their man Billy was dissed.
Oh dear, OK.
We can enjoy the jazz tomorrow and on Monday as well. I was going to pick up on the turnout, and I suppose it's worth putting it in context that turnout of presidential elections is the lowest of all of the election types that we have. On average, if we start in the 1960s, turnout at presidential elections is about 14 to 15 points lower than general elections. And this one actually seems to be coming in on trend. And I think that's probably an important point, because all the kind of variables were going in the wrong direction. Just two candidates, kind of a low intensity campaign towards the end, an active spoil the vote campaign, which could have discouraged people as much as encouraging them to vote. So I think if we do come in actually in the middle 40s, I know it still means a lot of people didn't participate, but it's maybe not the worst story of the election. I think it probably says it's kind of there within the kind of the general pattern of presidential elections.
Yeah, and a lot of people made the effort to go down to their polling station and spoil their vote.
They did, but I would have a slightly different view. I think 44% is pretty miserable, really. I mean, we had 56% in 2011, at the beginning of the Michael D. Higgins presidency. And why then should we say that 12 points less 14 years later is something that we should celebrate, because we thought it was going to be less than 40%. Now, there's a lot of evidence that if there is a contest where the outcome is pretty much known, and I think we all thought the outcome was pretty much known here a week out, that this does depress turnout. But in a democracy where we saw our general election result in terms of turnout go below 60% to 58.9%, and now we have 43 to 44%. Well, I think that is a serious worry, and particularly in the context of 10% spoiled votes, deliberately spoiled. We're not talking here about the old 1% of people, marking in or putting a 1 instead of an X, and you'd have a few cranks spoiling their ballots. We're looking here at, anything from 10 to 12%, which I do think begs the question of, we should relook at how we probably run these elections.
Gary, but I do think that within that you have to look at there's a myriad of reasons as well behind it, like the two candidates, I think, being a really big part of it. And that the fact that Maria Steen came so close and then didn't, and that that there was a whole cohort of people who felt that they weren't. I mean, yes, we ended up where we ended up, but you can't look at the circumstances. I think that would have worked to depress, all those factors would have worked to depress turnout. So I suppose the question is whether that's a more long-term thing or whether it's particular to this campaign.
There's also the whole question about the electoral register, and I know I'm singing your song here, and in fairness, the Electoral Commission on Commission Tóchán are putting an effort into actually tidying it up.
There's huge effort going into the electoral register, and it's happening in stages. And I think it's important to always say the first stage was always about getting people on the register who should be on the register and who wanted to vote. And the great travesty was people who wanted to vote not being able to vote. But there is also a large piece of work that is in train but moving a little bit slower, and that's on taking people off the register who shouldn't be on there. And that's people who have died, people who've emigrated, people who've moved houses, and we know that the register is overestimated, and the figures vary, but there's analyses done that have used CSO data, and it could be between 3 and 5%. So there are quite a few people on the register. So the figures are actually better than the actual figures are better than the official statistics. And I do think we were worried that it would drop below 40% because everything was telling us that it wasn't going to be a high turnout election. There was every reason to believe that it would drop even lower. And in fact, it seems to have stabilised. So, there's a lot of road to go, but I think maybe if it can stay in at least a stable pattern, there's something to build from. The real worry are the spoiled ballots, because this is about much more than,
isn't
the
that
structure
a democratic choice just as much as picking one of the candidates?
It's participation. At the end of the day, it's people going out and giving their opinion, and it speaks to a great dissatisfaction with the with the choice, with the selection of candidates that are before them. But I think that is also something that could rectify itself down the road. So the kind of big debate now is, will parties respond and put more candidates in the field, which I think they will, because strategically they've disadvantaged themselves this time around, or whether we need to change the actual structures. I think there's not a lot of appetite to change the structures.
But we're still looking at the second lowest vote in the history of presidential elections at 44% or so. And if it goes below 43.9, the lowest percentage in the history of the state, which notwithstanding what factors might be the cause, is, I think, a concern for worry, and also probably part of the general dissatisfaction with politics that the volatility of since the crash has epitomised.
I'd be very interested to know, and unfortunately we didn't there wasn't an exit poll done, but the vote for Jim Gavin, 7.5% for a lad who wasn't running.
I think these must be die-hard Fianna Fáilers, really.
Here I will give a plug for the National Election and Democracy Study. For the first time, we're going to be doing research on the presidential election, so there will be answers to some of these questions, but it will just take a little while.
OK, well, I think we might have some answers before then, because we're going over to the newsroom to Fran.
Thank you, David, and we have some latest results in. Let's go to Cork Northwest and see how things are faring out there. We have, again, national trend looking there. Catherine Connolly on 56.5, Heather Humphreys on 34.6, higher than she is in some constituencies, and Jim Gavin recording that 8.9% vote. And spoiled or invalid, almost 4,000 votes there. We also have a result in the past couple of minutes from the constituency of Mayo, traditionally a Fine Gael heartland. Let's see how things have worked out there this time around. If the tallies are anything to go by, it bears it out. Catherine Connolly on 65.8%, Heather Humphreys 28.1%, Jim Gavin on 6.1% as well. And again, look at those spoiled or invalid votes, 6,311 of them. Now, this has been the situation across the board, where we're seeing all of these votes and much talk about it today. Let's do a review of the national picture as we stand right now. Catherine Connolly on 63.6%, Heather Humphreys on 28.9%, and Jim Gavin on 7.5%. And that is with 23 of the 43 constituencies counted. With me now is pollster and lecturer and man who knows much about politics, Kevin Cunningham. Good evening, or good afternoon to you, Kevin.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk a little bit about the spoil votes. There has been a lot of talk about it today. And if we look at traditionally where we are in presidential elections, just over 1%. The record today, where we are so far, is extraordinary when you see it there.
Yeah, we're looking at 13.5% spoiled votes there, which is enormous. It's reflective in an opposition to the government. In some respect, when we asked people who they actually voted for, who they would have preferred to vote for if there was a number of candidates on the ballot, it was actually Maria Steen who was very popular amongst those particular voters. So it seems like towards the end of the campaign, there was a bit of a late surge towards the spoiled vote option as a lightning rod for people who are opposed to what had been happening during the campaign. And in fact, to the extent to which lots of candidates had obviously pulled out, and it just meant that it became this very strong option. What's also interesting in the poll that we did was that it's very strong as an option for people who are particularly young. And I'm talking about young males in particular, for which 24% indicated that they were spoiling their vote, compared to young women was 8%. So it's a much stronger thing amongst younger people. It seems to be stronger in Dublin, in places like Dublin Mid West. I think it was 20%. It was a very high figure, which is interesting in spite of the fact that Jim Gavin was obviously an option there, and they didn't really back him, and he's obviously very closely connected.
You're taking those figures. You polled, what, 2,000 or 3,000 people as part of an online panel?
Yeah, so there's polled 2,500 people. Well, actually, it was a slightly larger sample, but we reduced it down to make it representative. And SMS went out at 8 p.m, and we got the data back. And it actually, thankfully, it turned out to be relatively quite accurate, which is great. But it's really quite informative in terms of what's actually happened here.
I want to know what it told you about turnout, because if we go back to the national picture here and see where we're at and look at turnout, OK? And where we're at now is 45.4%. As the panel were saying to David earlier, ahead of where it finished in the last presidential campaign. There was much talk earlier about turnout being down. Does this surprise you, and do we know what's driving it?
It does to some extent. Now, obviously, in terms of spoil balance, briefly, like if they had a candidate, you'd probably expect that to even be slightly larger. But I think what's very important to point out here is that Catherine Connolly's vote is very instrumental here. When people were asked whether they were voting for or against a candidate, 59% of Connolly's voters were voting for her, 37% of Humphreys' candidates were voting for her, and only 9% of Jim Gavin's voters were voting for him as opposed to against another candidate. So it seems that Catherine Connolly was getting her vote out. I think in some sense that is helped by the fact that she had a number of political parties and their campaign teams working for her in spreading her message and effectively getting out a vote, which for her was a lot younger. Like, her vote is very strong amongst younger voters, particularly, I should say, young women. So 65% amongst 18 to 34-year-olds, but that rises to 81% of females who are aged 18 to 34.
So that fear about not getting the vote out didn't materialise?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, we were looking at some of the data in the run-up to this, and there did seem to be something similar to what you saw when it came to the abortion referendum in 2018, when essentially there was a lot of voters who were very keen on voting, and that seemed to be the case for the Connolly campaign as well.
Kevin, thanks for that. Handing back to you, David.
Thanks very much, Fran. I think we can go over to Nemo Rangers in Cork, where we're joined by Fianna Fáil MEP Billy Kelleher, the man, of course, who wanted to be the Fianna Fáil candidate but lost out to Jim Gavin. Billy Kelleher, what are you making of what we're hearing from the voters today?
Well, certainly a message has been sent, I think, to probably government and the political establishment, as we would call it. Effectively, the Catherine Connolly election campaign became a movement almost. And, you know, you could certainly detect there was a strong emphasis by young people on supporting Catherine Connolly. So I do think that the traditional political parties, primarily Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, but from my perspective, Fianna Fáil will very much have to reflect on that. We can't have a situation where our profile of support is ageing and we're not attracting young people. And that is certainly something that I have taken from this particular result, that young people were very much supporting Catherine Connolly out of warmth and, you know, sending a message also traditional parties as well.
OK, and I mean, obviously, because there was only two candidates in the running, it became government against opposition, and the people seem to have passed a judgment on the government which your party forms part of.
Yes, and look, there's no point in us. I mean, we're a political party. You must learn from election results, and this election result is anything but good for the government. But what we must do now is to assess the impact of this election, the message that was being sent to political parties, obviously to the government, and the fact that there was a Fine Gael candidate in the field. We didn't have a candidate in the field, but overall, the vast majority of the people that went to the polling stations either went to support Catherine Connolly or to spoil votes. So I think there was a double message there. I also think that there's a certain amount of alienation by a lot of people with the political system, and I think that's something we should be conscious of. Well, presidential elections come and go, but we can't have a situation where a huge cohort of people in a democratic country like Ireland feel alienated from the political system.
Do you feel a bit alienated from the political system yourself?
Well, I mean, obviously I would love to be the candidate for the party. I mean, it was a sad day when Mr. Gavin withdrew. That also distorted, I think, the whole political setup, in the sense that it became very much a binary choice between Catherine Connolly and Heather Humphreys. And look, if you look and analyse the campaign and the debates, there was more enthusiasm and excitement in Catherine Connolly's campaign. And I think that Heather Humphreys effectively was carrying the entirety of the government on her own, and that certainly was going to create difficulties. Plus the fact the Fianna Fáil vote, it stayed at home. Some of it reluctantly went to polling stations to vote. Where they voted, obviously, will be hard to detect. But there was no huge enthusiasm for Fianna Fáil voters to go to the polling stations and support one candidate or another. So all in all, it was a difficult day for Fianna Fáil people, going to polling stations, unsure of what they should do or what was the best course of action for them. But that's a lesson we have to learn as a political party. But I think more broadly, from the political parties in general, Fianna Fáil, from my perspective, we have to accept that there's a demographic tide underneath us and it's going in the wrong direction. And if we don't address that quickly, well, then the next couple of elections will be very challenging for us.
If you'd been on the ballot paper, would you have fancied your chances?
Well, look, David, when you go into a race, you have to believe that you can win, you can perform well. I certainly believe I would have finished the race. I think I would have performed in debates. I've been tried and tested over the last 33 years, but there's no point in me making an application for a job that's no longer there or available. I put my name before the party. They made a decision. That didn't work out, and we have the consequences of that. But look, I just want to wish Catherine Connolly well. Cogordagus Uachtarán Tuffa Catherine Connolly, and just to say that I wish her well. She's now my president, and from a political perspective, my party has to accept its share and analyse and take some lessons from this result.
OK, Billy Keller, MEP, thanks indeed for joining us. And I think we can go over now to Dublin Castle and Miriam.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'm here in the castle with Ivan Yates. Ivan, I have to put it to you, on your Path to Power podcast, you said a few weeks ago that you thought, way to go for the Heather Humphreys campaign was to smear Catherine Connolly. So did you help to win it for Catherine Connolly?
Well, what happened when I made those remarks, actually on a separate podcast calling it, it was actually weaponised, and what was used was the fact that I was a former Fine Gael minister, that this was part of a conflated Fine Gael strategy, when I haven't been involved in Fine Gael for 23 years. So that was really clever manoeuvre, and what it did was to provide a shield. So if anyone attacked her on any topic, said, oh, this is part of the smear campaign. And they used it very effectively, and it was one feature of what won it for Catherine, which was their digital marketing campaign. For the first time, social media, in my opinion, completely dominated this election. But other than the fact that Catherine was the most articulate candidate, she was really good at handling awkward questions, even reframing those questions. So she was a deserved winner at the end of the day. But the truth of it is, record spoiled vote, record low turnout, as well as a record winner. And I think all of those denote bad news for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And I think we're now entering a danger period from November to January, whereby Micheál Martin in particular is in peril, and that the mood of anger amongst Fianna Fáil people and the Parliamentary Party, and there's a report to come, is that they're looking for a head. And Micheál was in an unassailable position after the local and European and general elections. Great results for Fianna Fáil. He has expended all that political capital, and he when this report comes into Jim's recruitment and all of that, he is in real danger.
On Jim Gavin, when I was coming this morning, I did think about him because it's such a brutal campaign, the presidential campaign. Do you think when Jim Gavin exited, that impacted a lot on today's result?
Absolutely. The pivotal point of this campaign was the 5th of October. Sunday the 5th of October, when he withdrew, any nature of a tag team between Jim and Heather was gone. And basically, it imploded. Then what really won the local and general election was 40% transfers between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. The implosion of Fianna Fáil meant that wasn't possible. And then it just transformed the order. Then what happened was, 2 days later, we had one of the most unpopular budgets. 80% of people worse off in their pocket. And so basically, Middle Ireland wasn't in mood to do the government any favours.
Do you also feel, Ivan, that there were only 2 people on the ballot, that a large part of the reason maybe people did feel disaffected or didn't come out was because they didn't feel they had a big enough choice?
Well, the spoiled vote, you have Maria Steen and so on, that backfired on the government parties. They weren't on an obligation to support anyone other than their own. But it then looked like they were contriving to keep people out and to manipulate the nomination process, and therefore that was another negative against Heather Humphreys. So she was carrying all the government baggage, she was carrying all the nomination baggage, and, really the polls showed she wasn't getting more than the hardcore Fine Gael vote.
And earlier I was talking to Gareth Sheridan. He wanted to get on it, he didn't. Obviously we know Maria Steen wanted to get on it and didn't. Should we change the system, people are suggesting, Ivan, so that more people can get on the ballot slightly easier?
Yeah, you could do, say, 200 councillors as opposed to a particular council chamber. But the reality is that will require a referendum. And with the sort of toxic mood out there in relation to the public, I don't see the government or any party really having a queue to have a referendum on anything. Like basic reforms like the patent law, EU patents, they have shied away from that. They could have had referendums with the vote yesterday. They didn't do it. So I don't think there'll be a huge appetite for that. But there is a case to change it. But I don't think the bar should be so low that any dog or divil could run. Because you'll be aware we had a whole summer from Flatley to Conor McGregor and so on. So I think the bar has to be set at a reasonable level.
Final question, and it's a tough day for Heather Humphreys, but was she the right or the wrong candidate for Fine Gael?
Well, I don't think it's commonly known, but if you look into what would happen if Sean Kelly was elected, his substitute was a real problem for Fine Gael, and I think that's the reason why they didn't encounter that. Look, Mairead McGuinness would have been much more adept in the campaign due to her ill health. They went to Plan B, but the real problem was, and it came as a complete shock to me, that when she went out to the Ballymount studios, she had never been there before. So even though she was minister 10 years, the kind of rule of bouillon, prime time and all those debates, she hadn't done that. So actually people were quite shocked. Like the accent was an issue, but really she even things like stepping up to the plate and even defending fox hunting on your debate, she wasn't articulate enough to nail issues, whereas the adroitness of Catherine was really to behold. But so basically now the issue is, what will be the relationship between the President and the government? So I could see trouble areas, not necessarily on legislation, but things like, say she wants to go to Palestine, and the government says, well, we don't think that's a good idea, or she wants to go to the States. So there are potential areas for tension, but I think if we look at her record as Lascon Corla, she's not going to be a troublemaker. And I thought in the last week of the campaign, she toned that down. Well, these are my views, but as President, I will take a different role. So I think it'll all settle down, but where it won't settle down is the fallout in Fianna Fáil, and I think Micheál is in real peril between now and January. If he gets past January, the presidency, don't hit me with the baby in my arms until this time next year.
Ivan Yates, as ever, thank you so much for being our guest today. And we're going to take a commercial break. Join us in a few moments.
very welcome back to our continuing coverage of the presidential election count. Let's catch up with the latest count to come in. Kildare North turnout 48.5%. For just under 5,000 invalid votes. And again, Catherine Connolly on 62.5%. Heather Humphreys just under 30%. Jim Gavin 8.5%. And Wicklow, the constituency, of course, of the Taoiseach Simon Harris, turnout quite high, nearly 52%. 5,500 invalid votes. But again, despite this being a strong constituency for Fine Gael, Catherine Connolly 64%, Heather Humphreys 29%, Jim Gavin of Fianna Fáil, the candidate, of course, who withdrew from the campaign, 7.5%. And that gives us a national summary. 25 of the 43 constituencies have reported. Turnout thus far is 45.8%. So if that carried through, it would be just a touch higher than the last presidential election 7 years ago. 127,708 people so far went to the trouble of going to the polling station and either inadvertently or deliberately spoiling their ballot. And with 25 of the 43 constituencies reporting, Catherine Connolly commanding leads 63.5%, Heather Humphreys on 28.9% and Jim Gavin on 7.6%. Alison O'Connor, I gave the full figure there for Heather Humphreys because if she stays at that, Mary Benotti got 29.3% in 1997. So it is possible that Heather Humphreys could surpass that, in which case she'd be the most successful Fine Gael presidential candidate in 50 years. But she's still second in a two-horse race.
Yeah, and it's, I guess you could call it a crumb of poor comfort, really, at this stage. And I mean, that figure, the other figure you gave there, 127,000 of the spoiled votes. I mean, that's a lot. I think it was being estimated. I heard anything up to 80,000 if you were looking at the 6% predicted by the Irish Times poll, and that is a lot of people taking the trouble to go to their polling station.
Now, some of them, in fairness, would be the usual people.
Would have been the usual people in error, but even taking that into consideration. I mean, I think this is a fairly stunning, politically, it's a pretty stunning blow to the government. The only thing that stands, and that's not to take from a very, very good campaign run by Catherine Connolly and the cooperation of the left-wing parties, and how Catherine Connolly quite obviously struck a chord with the young people. Billy Kelleher was talking there about, I suppose it's a lot of what the established parties already know, but I suppose even how poor the established parties are on social media and stuff. You know what I mean? They're not just not great, they're really poor, and they were so shown up by the Connolly campaign. Ivan Yates mentioned the budget there. I had that down. I mean, I think somebody in Fine Gael was saying to me that actually they were pushing for the budget to be earlier. And that I said, well, why didn't that happen? Micheál hadn't got his ducks in a row. So that's also will be a point of contention, I reckon, within, because I think it did make a difference. The idea that no individuals, households, families were able to point to any boost, if you like, in terms of what we would normally expect in the budget, I think that created an awful lot of soreness. The one bright spot for the government in all of this is that they're only a year in. They haven't looked very impressive so far, and maybe this is the kick in the behind that will propel them onto doing something, or it won't. You know, it's a case of watch this space.
OK, watch this space. I mean, I wonder, are there repercussions for the leaders of the two main parties? Because there will be questions in both Fine Gael and particularly, as we heard earlier from Billy Kelleher, particularly in Fianna Fáil.
I mean, undoubtedly there will be questions. I think presidential elections are interesting because there's often a kind of a clear connection between the party leader and the chosen candidate. They often have a decisive influence in who gets selected. This is I mean, even in parties where members have a role to play in selecting the candidates, the members have that role. Leaders identify the candidates. They structure the choices that are put before members, and in that way they're more intrinsically connected to who the party candidate is, and ultimately then how they perform in the election. I think the more immediate, I think we kind of slightly vary in this. I think the more immediate challenge is to Micheál Martin. I mean, that was really quite a spectacular combustion. And also there's the fact there's a report coming in a couple of weeks which is going to bring it all back up again. And so it's a controversy that's not going to go away. And I think he's been leader for a very long time. And so there's a degree of dissatisfaction. Is this the kind of reason that kind of brings his leadership to an end? Probably not. But it is a crack in what has otherwise been a fairly impermeable leadership term for Micheál Martin. Fine Gael is a bit more mixed. There isn't a sense that there's anybody immediately seeking to topple Simon Harris. His candidate bizarrely could end up actually with not a dreadful outcome, albeit that in the context of a two-horse race it is rather dreadful. But he still has a candidate in the field at least, and that candidate hasn't done especially badly. We're not in kind of Gay Mitchell 6% territory, so you can probably take something from it. Probably also saved a little bit by the fact that this wasn't the preferred candidate. It was somebody who stepped in at the last minute. I mean, I think there'll probably still be questions, but I think the more immediate conversations are already happening in Fianna Fáil.
Gary?
Well, she's done pretty badly in a two-horse race. And Simon Harris, I was very struck by his interview with Miriam earlier, where he said that, and we're building a renewal of Fine Gael under my leadership. Now, this is a man who has now already fought the four elections the state has to offer and performed pretty poorly in all four. But there doesn't seem to be a challenger. I mean, people talk about Jennifer Carl McNeil, but I think we're a bit off that. On Fianna Fáil, all it would take is someone to do what Micheál Martin did to Brian Cohen back in early January 2011. In other words, to make a challenge. Now, it's a difficult thing to challenge a Taoiseach and a leader of a party. And, of course, he's been there since January 11. He's practically 15 years. But if you're in Fianna Fáil, and I thought Billy Kelleher's interview was quite striking. It was reserved, but I sensed a kind of a cold fury underneath his smile to you at the end, Dave, when you asked him, would you think he would have won the election or done better? And I think he clearly would have been a much more difficult challenge for Catherine Connolly, particularly on European issues. He would have taken her on the whole issue around Europe having lost its moral compass. He would have taken her on about Ukraine. And I think it's a lost opportunity. And to go to Teresa's point, I mean, Jim Gavin was Micheál Martin's candidate. And it's slightly embarrassing, I think, for everyone in Fianna Fáil to be looking at the screen now and seeing the little green with 6% and saying, like, what's going on in our party?
OK, well, we'll maybe pick up on some of those thoughts a little bit later. But let's go over to the newsroom and Fran.
Let's get the two latest counts, David. We're going to go to Limerick County first, which is just in, and take a look at how things have fared out there on the first count. If we look at that there, 57.9% for Catherine Connolly. Heather Humphreys on 35%, which her camp will be happy with there. Jim Gavin on 7.1%, a turnout of almost 45% in Limerick County. The other one that has just arrived into us literally within the past few minutes is Donegal, which will be interesting to see how this fares out. Of course, a Sinn Féin stronghold. Let's see if the Catherine Connolly vote 75%. That is quite high. Heather Humphreys on 21%, Jim Gavin on 4%. The turnout there, though, is lower than many would have expected, 39.8%, and the invalids again quite high. Let's talk some more about those invalid votes and what they might mean. Kevin Cunningham is still with us. Kevin, if we look at, there's a lot of talk about a left alliance. Is this going to change things? And if we look at the last general election and the makeup of the parties, is this a turning point in politics potentially?
Well, certainly at the last general election, one of the arguments for people not voting for Sinn Féin, one of the arguments certainly in commentary, was that it seemed implausible that they were going to form their own government because it didn't look that they would ever have their numbers. This presidential election has shown to some extent that the left parties, when they do get together, can potentially get the numbers together. And we did ask a question in that survey I mentioned earlier about whether people would consider supporting an alliance of left-wing parties, including Sinn Féin, Labour Party, Social Democrats and People for Profit. And there does seem to be some momentum behind that. There was 30 to 40% of people overall indicating that they would, and then another percentage saying it depends. Now, it's worth saying that half of Connolly's vote is in favour of this, but a large section of her vote is not. Now, she's obviously on 64%.
Look at the strength of that.
So she doesn't necessarily need to get all of that to get towards the key marker, which is around 50%. I think, broadly speaking, you could argue that it would be competitive if those parties got together. I think this is a testament of that. And broadly speaking, if you looked at the start of this campaign, it was the Social Democrats who backed Catherine Connolly, and the Labour Party took a position to have a unified left candidate, and that did seem to work.
What can we read into that? Look at these numbers here for invalid or spoilt ballots. 142,000, 68,000 people voted for Jim Gavin, who wasn't even on the ballot, in the race, effectively.
Yeah, no, you're right. So this is obviously a subset of the voter base. I mean, there's a whole lot of voters who normally vote. People who typically vote for Aintu or the Independents or Independent Alliance. They would... they're actually, in most cases, indicating that they're spoiling the ballot. So if you add those people back in here, you'll notice obviously that the left vote isn't as strong as it might appear here. But it's still quite strong. I mean, you have to figure out, you have to consider the fact that there will be a relatively strong kind of right of centre vote that isn't in favour of this left alliance.
We're going to go to one of the latest results. I went wrong there. I need to go back. Going to go to Limerick City because we have the first count is in from Limerick City. And let's see where we're at. So, Catherine Connolly, 65.4%. Heather Humphreys, almost on 29%. Jim Gavin on 5.7%. Turnout in Limerick City of almost 41%. That's it from the newsroom. Over to you, Miriam.
Thanks for that, Fran. And I'm here in Dublin Castle and I'm joined now by Diarmuid Ferriter, historian extraordinaire. What is your overall reaction to today's?
Well, it's the scale of the margin that is historic. You know, it's such an emphatic victory on mandate. I know it's coming on the back of a low turnout. Mandates are very important for presidents. You know, we've had presidents in the past who haven't had mandates because they may have been agreed candidates or became president without an election, and it weighed on them.
Yeah.
So I think it'll embolden the president-elect. There are certain echoes, I thought, from 1990. The Robinson campaign, in that Catherine Connolly was very early out of the traps. She started a nationwide tour to make herself visible, to make herself known, and she stuck to the idea that she was who she was and she wasn't going to reinvent herself. There was a fixity of purpose there, and it was quite consistent, and it certainly paid off.
Why do you think she did do so well in the end in comparison to Heather Humphreys? What won it for her, do you believe, Jeremy?
Well, I think there are all sorts of issues in relation to what message is being conveyed and what impression is being created by a particular candidate. There's also, obviously, given the much more fractured landscape we have now, there isn't that sense of this being a contest that is owned by the bigger political parties, and that people could find an alternative. Now, that might mean a candidate means all sorts of things to different people, but that sense of building some kind of an alliance, you know, and you're coming from outside of the perceived political establishment, and, you know, they take on a momentum of their own then, these kind of campaigns. And an awful lot of the focus, obviously, is on media, social media, performance during debates. They are big factors, but I think people were looking for a sense of a candidate who would be eloquent, who would be very fixed in their sense of self, you know, and you've got to think about the office and what it represents. You know, we have the same debates during presidential campaigns that have really been going on since the creation of the office in the 1930s. What does a president stand for? Can they be a symbol? Do they really have power? How might they conduct themselves? Now, these are going to be tricky questions for Catherine Connolly as well, you know, and we've had tensions in the past in relation to a president who has a strong sense of self. Mary Robinson, of course, famously at the time when she was running for president, insisted she'd be able to look Charlie Haughey in the eye and tell him to back off. So we have been talking about, you know, potential tensions. Sometimes tensions can become bigger controversies and even crises. So there's a balance to be struck there. And given the amount that's expected of Catherine Connolly and given where she drew her support from, that's going to be a tricky balancing act for her.
OK, Diarmuid Ferriter, as ever, thank you very much for joining us here today. And now we're going to take a break. Join us in a few moments. Welcome back to our continuing coverage here in Dublin Castle. I'm joined by Mary Lou McDonald. Thank you so much for joining us, Mary Lou. Great day for you and for Catherine Connolly. Why do you think it went so well for Catherine Connolly?
I think this is obviously a landmark victory for Catherine personally, and I want to congratulate her and her current husband Brian and their wider family. But I also think this is a landslide for hope, for optimism, for positivity, for Ireland as a neutral and active neutral, for our rightful place in the world, for equality and fairness for people with disabilities and carers, for our young people, and also for the process now of reunification and that big national conversation that we need to have. And I think the success of the campaign was a blend of authenticity, positivity and a lot of genuine political direction and content. It wasn't just a sounding board. Catherine came at this with a set of principles, ideas, convictions, and then of course the combined opposition. We came together in a cohesive way, and the campaign that resulted was dynamic, organic, grassroots.
Do you think it helped you as well? I was talking to Ivan Yates a moment ago, and mentioning that he said go out and smear, but that it was certainly a very negative campaign, people will say, run by Heather Humphreys, which benefited probably Catherine Connolly.
Well, I don't think that negativity played well at all. I suppose what made this an exceptional kind of electoral moment is that Ivan Yates went and said it out loud. It's not simply that there was a strategy to discredit or smear, choose your word, but that he said it out plainly. And then I think when the attacks came, and particularly that video, that now infamous video, I think people saw that and saw what it was, what that was all about. And it's not that any candidate has to answer the questions, even if you think they're repetitive, even if you think they're unfairly put or charged. That's part of the democratic accountability mechanism. I don't think anybody would have expected that Catherine or any other candidate would get an easy ride. But there's a world of difference between that and an active campaign to just discredit unfairly or indeed to smear.
Now, we know a lot of people didn't bother to vote at all. Yes. A lot of other people destroyed their votes. There are therefore quite a lot of disaffected people, but they come from different places. Does that concern you?
I think it is significant that Catherine has such an unparalleled historic mandate. That's the first issue, and that shouldn't be missed. But neither should we miss that fact, Miriam, as you say, that people stayed away or that people chose to spoil their vote. And I think we have to acknowledge that, and I think we have to listen to that. And I would like to say to all of those people, you have a stake in this as well. You have to be heard. You have a right to participate, to have a sense of being heard and being represented. So I think we need to pick up this ball after this election. I think we need to go out to our towns and villages, our communities, listen to people, hear what they have to say. And we need a respectful dialogue. We need to have a standard of decency, not blame or finger pointing or judgment, but a culture of respect where at a minimum we can hear each other. And then where we disagree, we disagree. But generally Irish people are decent and reasonable and want the best for their communities, for their country. And I think in most cases we can actually reach each other. It does not mean that we are always going to agree with each other. I think, by the way, Catherine Azukdaran will be a really, really strong standard bearer for that kind of value and that kind of approach.
Well, Mary Lou McDonald, thank you for taking the time to stand here with me today.
Thank you.
And now back to you, David, in studio.
Thanks very much, Miriam. Now I think we can take a look at some other results that have come in. Sligo Leitrim turnout 49%, just under 5,000 spoiled votes. Catherine Connolly 63.5%, Heather Humphreys 31.4% and Jim Gavin 5.2%. So that leaves the national summary with 29 of the 43 constituencies. We are getting there. Turnout 45.4% thus far, 147,000 invalid votes, and Catherine Connolly, the clear winner, 64% of the votes. counted so far. Heather Humphreys on 28.8%. And Jim Gavin, the candidate who withdrew, still getting 7.2% of the vote. Now, Alison, obviously Catherine Connolly is the big winner today. Were we just watching the second biggest winner today?
I think we were, and I have to say I'm watching Mary Lou McDonald with some admiration. Anyone who saw the video yesterday of her, of that canvas that she was doing for Catherine Connolly and the bunch, I think it was all women and a child, when they were set upon by an individual, it was frightening to watch, let alone to be there. And I think there's a strong case for saying that the way the atmosphere is now, that even leaders of the opposition should have a member of the Gardaí.
She's had a lot of abuse.
Has. I mean,
it's
absolutely horrendous. So I just start by saying that. I think it really will put a pep in the Sinn Féin step. I know there's been a lot of people saying today, what about if they had ran a candidate themselves? I suppose you can never predict how that would have gone. I think that for the moment, if this left-wing alliance, and it's a big if it progresses, Sinn Féin would ultimately be seen as the winners, and that's maybe where it might fall down, because how do the other parties feel about that? It is the big question. And the other thing was, and Mary Lou McDonald mentioned it there, again coming back to the spoiled votes, and Kevin Cunningham saying that thing, highlighting the number of young men who it's understood to have spoiled. We see what's happening out in City West. And I think that just for the political system, I mean, and it's a global thing, really, seeing that. I think that's something that for me, that's come out of today that's interesting. Now, the other thing I'm going to be looking out for, we're really tearing through the constituencies, the counts. Shortly, everybody will be gathering in Dublin Castle. I mean, we saw in 1990 that when Mary Robinson became president, that Dick Spring, the leader of the Labour Party, was up behind her. And I would be curious to know whether, I'm sure, Heather, I'm sure that Mary Lou, as we know, Mary Lou McDonald is there. Holly Cairns was here. I'm sure she's going there. Ivana Batchik, Paul Murphy. Will they or will they not be on the stage? I was listening to Catherine Connolly on a journal podcast during the week. She was asked this question. She said, I'm not sure the protocol, who stands behind. I think I'm standing there on my own on Saturday. So whether they'll be photobombing her or not, I'll be watching with interest.
OK, and she's right the way through the campaign, actually, Teresa. Catherine Connolly was very insistent on saying, I am an independent. I am backed by certain parties, but this is my campaign.
Absolutely, and I think that's actually partially why she was able to navigate the campaign so effectively. She didn't feel she was beholden to any one of the political parties, or that she had to especially articulate or respond to them. And I think that was the key to her success. I think it's a stunning victory for Catherine Connolly today. It really is an extraordinary one. I think she built her campaign slowly. I think she availed of opportunities on the electoral landscape, some that were unexpected, some that she was hoping for, and it's a testament to the kind of professionalism, the endurance, but also the discipline of her campaign that she is here today.
It'll be really interesting to read what I'm sure we will see over the behind the scenes of how it all worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gary, I mean, I suppose the question going forward, if a left-wing alliance is to survive, the left-wing will have to cooperate and play nice and everything, which is not something that, generally speaking, has been a characteristic of the left.
No, and that's one of the great achievements of the Connolly campaign, that it did unite that left. But I, for one, would be very surprised if Paul Murphy ever ends up in office with Labour, for instance, or even the Social Democrats. And I think when government formation comes around, if they even get anywhere near 90 seats, which is what you need for a stable majority. And we're 4 years away from a general election, or at least we should be. So I remain sceptical about the long-term future of a left-wing government. But today is Catherine Connolly's day. She now becomes president for us all, and all we can do is wish her luck in that onerous task ahead.
Absolutely.
Hear, hear.
Absolutely. And Teresa, of course, the question about the relationship between the President and government will be an interesting one over the next 7 years.
Well, I think that may produce some commentary. I think she will settle into the role in the coming months, and she has had a formal role before. She was Lascaux Corla, so she's had some experience, but I think we would expect some perhaps gentle fireworks ahead. OK, well, before we go, let's see the latest constituency to come in. Were there any fireworks there? Roscommon, Galway.
51.2% turnout, 3,700 spoiled votes, and again, consistent picture in most constituencies. 63.6% for Catherine Connolly, 29.9% for Heather Humphreys, 6.5% for Jim Gavin. And the national summary, with 30 of the 43 constituencies in, Catherine Connolly on just under 64%, Heather Humphreys just under 29%, Jim Gavin on 7%. And as the panel have been saying, Catherine Connolly will be our next president. And that is our lot for the moment. Eileen and Sharon will be here with 6-1, perhaps with a final result. If not, then we'll bring it to you later. For now, though, from Fran, Miriam, me and all the team, thanks for watching and good afternoon.
In a